with our next panel discussion. This one is going to be a great one as well. So our next panel discussion, which is on juvenile justice reform through policy and funding strategies, leading to meaningful opportunities that impact at-risk youth. Joining us today is Mr. David Steinhardt and Mr. Castle Redmond. David Steinhardt is the director of the Commonwealth Juvenile Justice Program and is the Senate's appointee to the Board of State and Community Corrections. He is an attorney advocate with a long track record of advising California legislators on juvenile justice law and policy. He was principal drafter of California's laws removing children from adult jails, creating homeless youth programs, and widening children's access to mental health care. Mr. Steinhardt will be followed by Mr. Castle Redmond. Castle Redmond is the program manager of Healthy Youth Development at the California Endowment. He oversees the Health Foundation's 10-year, $1 billion Building Healthy Communities plan. Mr. Redmond is, big budget, exactly, big money. Mr. Redmond is responsible for creating funding strategies for youth development and violence prevention with an emphasis on juvenile justice and school discipline policies. After each presentation, we will do questions and answers, and then if there's a question for both panelists, we'll do a joint question and answer. Okay, so at this time, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Mr. David Steinhardt.
Great. Okay, thanks. Can you hear me without holding this mic? Okay.
They're recording it.
I realize we have two mics going, so we'll try to do both of them and something in each hand here. Thank you for that introduction, and we're going to go more global here in terms of juvenile justice. I've spent 30 years working on juvenile justice policy and legislation, program and fund development in California, and I've seen a lot of ups and downs in the development of this system. But I think what I'd like to start out doing today is to describe for you, at least my impressions of where we are at in terms of juvenile justice development and reform in California. We've come a very long way, and we're in a very interesting place right now, one that has implications for all of your work. And speaking of your work, I'd just like a quick sense of who's in the room. Let me ask this. How many direct service providers from the behavioral health perspective are there, mental health providers and the like? Okay, how about probation officers, probation department representation? Do we have law enforcement in the room? No police. What am I leaving out? Because there's half of you here that...
CBOs. Community organizations.
CBOs, got it, okay. CBOs, okay, good, that just gives me a sense. So let me begin. First of all, here's what I plan to discuss today. I'm going to try to stick to the time schedule. A kind of grounding in the facts. What is the status of the California juvenile justice system in terms of who's in it, arrests, incarceration, transfers to adult court, and the like. And then some sort of flyover of where we are in terms of juvenile justice reform in California. Then I want to move into some discussion of the changing paradigm, new juvenile justice policy trends that are evolving at the national level and among the states, with a focus on adolescent development and some of the brain science that's being integrated into the law more recently. And because I get asked this all the time based on being on the Board of State and Community Corrections, I want to describe what that outfit is doing in juvenile justice. And speaking of money, there's a lot of money flowing through the board, and we can talk about that too. And then finally, just a few comments on the challenges of juvenile justice reform for the future. So that's what I hope to cover today. So let's dive in with some of the numbers. So how many kids are being arrested in California now? I know you guys want me to stand near this microphone. This has just been an astonishing 10 to 20 year period in California, where we've seen a massive decline in the candidates for processing formally through the system. So overall, we had about close to 100,000 juvenile arrests in California in 2013. That's the latest data year that's available. And that's down 57, almost 60% from 10 years ago, well, 13 years ago in 2003. A massive decline. And you can see from the chart that felonies are about a quarter of it, and a lot of arrest activity goes on beneath the felony surface with stat offenses and misdemeanors. Here's where policymakers really plug in the felony arrest rates for kids in California. So here's a chart that goes from 1995 to 2013. The bar chart is numbers of kids arrested, and you can see there, again, an astonishing decline over time. The real message is in that red line. That's the rate of juvenile felony arrests per 100,000 age-eligible kids, 10 to 17. And that rate has dropped by close to 70% over this very long period. And you know, felonies drive policy in California. When crime is up, juvenile facilities fill up, prisons fill up, policy toughens up. When crime is down, other things happen. And we're in that other things happen zone, which we'll discuss in a minute. When we look at just violent crimes at arrests, this is adults who are arrested over this period for crimes of violence, murder, rape, kidnap, and the like, aggravated assault. And the bottom line is kids. Most people think that kids do worse than adults. Well, here's some information that shows you that the arrest rate for kids for violent offenses has dropped precipitously and is dropping even more steeply in the last couple of years. What about incarceration? As referrals to the system drop, so we hope anyway, do facility populations. This is the California Division of Juvenile Facilities, also called DJJ, Division of Juvenile Justice. Used to be the CYA, for those of you who remember that. This population has crashed from 10,000 kids being locked up in state facilities back in 1996 to fewer than 700 today. Now that's the result not only of declining crime, but changing policy, realignment in particular. But again, I'm moving quickly through this just to give you a sense of the trend and where we stand over time. What about county facilities? You know, California has a vast population, I won't use the word population, a vast occupancy capacity for kids in local facilities. We built a lot of them. They can hold a lot of people, but right now they're running at about 50%. I'm talking about juvenile halls, which are the short-term detention facilities, and probation camps and ranches, which exist in about 30 different counties. And so you can, again, just appreciate this graph that the trend toward populating these facilities is down. And the gap you see there between the red line on top, capacity, and the bar on the bottom, population, is about a 50% occupancy gap. We have empty beds now in California. A big concern, policy concern these days is about moving kids into the adult system. We can empty out the juvenile system by trying kids as minors and putting them in state prison. And that's a policy debate that's strong around the entire country. But in California, we've seen the transfers of kids into the adult system actually decline over the last several years by about 40%. So again, this is because we have less crime, less serious crime, and fewer kids going into adult court. So that's just an overview of the trend, the volume of activity in the juvenile justice system. And it goes all the way through the system. Fewer petitions filed, fewer court dispositional orders, and fewer kids in confinement. This is just truly an astonishing development. And it has really changed the game. When I was arguing juvenile justice reform 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was an uphill battle all the way. We were talking about violent juvenile predators and how to lock them up and lock them up forever. And that discussion has largely gone away. Now we're talking about what works and what doesn't work. And that's a far, far better discussion. I want to actually, I'm not going to go through PowerPoint now. At this point, I'm going to get off of this and just talk about where I think, from my perspective, given these trends, where do we stand in terms of juvenile justice reform in California? We have this kind of wonderful lull where we are tilting heads with prosecutors about how to lock up more kids. Not so much anymore. and where the discussion is about funding programs that work, about risk and needs assessment, about getting value for investment in programs, about mental health and the like. So let me just kind of run through some milestones of reform achievement, I would call it, that have been accomplished in California over the last decade or so. You saw that chart about the division of juvenile justice, going from 10,000 kids in state lockup under pretty miserable conditions, I might add, down to fewer than 700. That was Senate Bill 81 in 2007, the fundamental realignment law that moved nonviolent kids out of state custody and into local control. I was right in the middle of that. I wrote major pieces of the law and was in the negotiations with the county. So ultimately, we got that realignment law and were able to essentially empty out these terrible state facilities through a negotiation about money. The counties wanted to know, well, you know, if you're going to shift the caseload to me, where's the money to take care of the kids? And that's what the debate was largely about. And so the reason that juvenile justice realignment has worked so well in California, at least in large part, is that $100 million and more per year goes from state to local government to support that caseload shift. Many thought when we adopted that reform that these bad kids would go back to the counties and the whole thing would blow up. We'd have increases in crime. It didn't happen. All the doomsday sayers who said that if we take these dangerous kids out of state facilities and put them back in county care, the system would blow up, there'd be crime in the streets. Didn't happen. The data don't support that. So realignment has been an important reform milestone in California. We've also seen changes in sentencing law affecting more serious cases. These come from Supreme Court decisions that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So now we've relaxed our life without parole terms for kids with serious offenses and provided for sentence review. Ed Cohen talked about mental health care. This has always been a terrible problem zone for juvenile justice because it's fair to say that because we have this facility space, because schools don't want them, mental health hasn't got the money to help them, foster care doesn't do their job with mental health, these kids get dumped into juvenile justice facilities, and that is still happening. And the resources in the system to provide the help they need are just not there, not enough of them anyway. So we've had problems getting Mental Health Services Act money into the juvenile justice system. We have another problem with the inmate exception, which says no Medi-Cal for kids that are locked up. So this is a place where we haven't made the progress I'd like to see, but we've made marginal progress. Last year we worked with Darrell Steinberg to restore the Mentally Ill Offender Crime Reduction Grant Program, $18 million, half going to kids for new programs at the county level. That goes through the Board of State and Community Corrections. So we're making some progress there, but this is a place where we need to do much, much more. Education law and juvenile justice. This is another sort of black hole for juvenile justice, meaning that we have these kids who come out of facilities, they go into continuation schools, community schools, they're on the Titanic for educational failure. And we have done not nearly enough to support their reintegration and success in the mainstream school system. But we have a legislature that's far more responsive now, and so we've adopted a couple of bills in the last few years that tend to bend more of these kids back into mainstream schools and tend to prevent the push-out effect that we have seen in the past. Again, much, much more needs to be done, because without an education, these young people will fulfill the prophecy of becoming chronic offenders and state prisoners. We did pass a law last year that banned the lockup of truants, which was very good because courts were using contempt power to get around the legislative ban on locking up truants. So Mark Leno got a bill, the governor signed it, and finally we said, if you're truant, we're not going to put you behind bars. So that was good progress. There were questions about foster care asked earlier, and crossover kids. Crossover kids meaning those with histories in both systems, juvenile justice and welfare. Not enough done, but some very good studies, the Hilton study and so on, at least documents the problems that these kids face. And the Sierra Health Foundation has, I'd say, the sort of frontline initiative on this in 4 counties to come up with more coordinated solutions for crossover kids, kids in both systems. We also adopted AB 12, affecting probation youth, that provides for continuing foster care benefits, including probation kids through age 21, so that's been good too. Let me just skip, I don't want to use too much time on that. I mean, my assessment is that on the reform front, we have done pretty well in California. Pretty well. We have this lull in crime, this great opportunity. We have a more responsive legislature. We have a great set of advocates at work from community agencies, law clinics, and the like. We have foundation support for reform, the likes of which we've never seen before in California. And so we're making good progress. That doesn't mean that we don't need to do more, but we need to do much more. I want to focus for a few minutes on what I had on the main slide there on coverage, which was the new national framework for juvenile justice in America. We really are on a new frontier of policy and program and practice that is being driven by adolescent science, adolescent development, and brain science. And I don't know if Ed covered any of this since I didn't come here, wasn't here at the early part of the session. But this has just been the beginning of a sea change in juvenile justice in America, and it's filtering down to the practice level in the states at all stages of juvenile justice processing. So we have an expanded body of research that demonstrates beyond a shadow of a doubt what you already know, which is that kids are different from adults, and that they are developmentally different, and that their brains do not fully mature until about age 25. Compared to adults, the research shows that adolescents are, what a surprise, impulsive, make decisions based on emotion more than on judgment, that immediate rewards count more than future consequences, and that behavior is strongly peer-driven. So these are common sense notions, but they're being backed up by research. The problem has been that the law has been so slow to catch up with what we know, and the law is now catching up with the research. And this is demonstrated nowhere more importantly than at the United States Supreme Court. Starting in 2005, the United States Supreme Court began a series of decisions on changing constitutional law for the sentencing of juvenile offenders. Roper v. Simmons in 2005 outlawed the death penalty essentially for juveniles. Graham v. Florida, Miller v. Alabama, later on through 2012, changed the law on life without parole sentences for kids and softened it up. And in reaching these decisions, they relied ever so strongly on the adolescent brain science and adopted the doctrines that kids are developmentally different from adults, and that they have diminished culpability, and that the sanctions imposed by the system must be different. So this started a kind of ball rolling that has pinballed around the states and is causing changes in law everywhere. So we see states now actually beginning to go backwards from where they used to be, and they're restoring juvenile justice jurisdiction at higher ages. They're actually putting more kids back into the juvenile system, getting away from this old notion that adult time for adult crime is what we've got to do for kids. So Connecticut, Mississippi, Illinois, Massachusetts, New York on the verge are actually raising the age of juvenile jurisdiction. Other states are cutting back on the direct file laws that pump kids into the adult prison system. And these are in large part outfall from the recognition that of these doctrines that the United States Supreme Court has put into play. The National Academy of Sciences has done a fantastic job of connecting the brain science and juvenile justice reform and legal doctrines in a report called Reforming Juvenile Justice, a Developmental Approach. And I put this on a slide because I think this should be required reading for anybody who's working in both fields, behavioral health and juvenile justice. So they've summarized the science on the one hand, and they have infiltrated that into what the justice system is doing and what it ought to do. And they've come up with a series of recommendations. For example, they demonstrate very strongly that incarceration is bad for kids. Well, why? Because they're locked up with other kids, because they're heavily influenced by peer pressure, because they're impulsive, and because as a result of being incarcerated, they learn how to break the law better and more frequently. And so this is not to say that kids now, because of adolescent science, get a free ride or a ticket to do whatever the heck they want to do, but it is to suggest that when we incarcerate or make decisions about sanctions for young people, that we want to do something that is developmentally appropriate and developmentally effective. And pure incarceration without help really doesn't cut it. In addition, throwing minors into the adult system and pushing them into long prison terms is something that the developmental researchers in this report say is not appropriate, and so on. So there's a lot more here, and I don't have time to go into it all, but this is a great report and one worth looking at. Another very interesting study is called the Crossroads Study. This is funded by the MacArthur Foundation and OJJDP, the Office of Juvenile Justice. And it's ongoing, and the prime researchers are Larry Steinberg and Beth Kaufman down at UC Irvine. They examined first-time offenders in Pennsylvania, Louisiana, and Orange County, California. And the goal of this was to take kids that arise out of the sort of same circumstances with the same offenses and compare those who had formal justice system processing with those who were diverted from formal system processing, and then to measure their outcomes. And guess what? The kids who were not formally processed did better. They had lower recidivism rates, better education outcomes, better mental health outcomes, and more jobs. This is what we know so far. So this has huge implications for juvenile justice. It tells us that we need to start doing something differently. Ed pointed to some diversion models, and diversion has been around for a long time. We had youth service bureaus back 30 years ago, run by police and so on. But what we need is targeted, effective diversion that identifies young people early on and provides them with an opportunity for recovery without formal justice system processing, based on the fact that we know that if they're formally processed, they're on a train ride to failure in many respects. So this is another example of research that's going on. Another Los Angeles probation study comes up with some similar outcomes. So this is the challenge ahead, is to, I think, integrate this fascinating new research on adolescent development and brain science into the fabric of the juvenile justice system at all stages, not just as the Supreme Court has done, saying you can't administer the death penalty to kids, but at the early and medium stages of processing, at the point at which we consider what conditions of confinement are appropriate, as we do risk and needs assessment and so on. So this is the undone work lying ahead. And it's a very promising time. It's an opportunity that we need to catch. So I actually want to stop there on this theme and go to a brief discussion about the Board of State and Community Corrections. People ask me about this. I'm on the board. I'm the Senate appointee. I am the juvenile justice seat filler on the Board of State and Community Corrections. BSCC was used to be the Corrections Standards Authority. In 2012, the legislation was completely reconfigured. The board was reconfigured, smaller group. And in the context of adult prison realignment, the new Board of State and Community Corrections was tasked with a lot of implementation on the challenge of moving adult prisoners from prisons into jails. In my first meeting, I voted on $1.7 billion of funding for jail expansion in California to implement adult prison realignment. And I must say that as we look at the legislature, at BSCC, at the governor, and the like, when we talk about criminal justice, they talk about adult prison realignment, the courts, and so on. So juvenile justice is kind of under the radar in many respects. But we have been pushing to build the juvenile justice policy and program capacity of BSCC. BSCC inherited juvenile justice mandates from the old agency. They're responsible for facility standards, those juvenile camps and ranches and juvenile halls, and the inspections. They administer very large grant programs. We have about $200 million flowing from the state to local counties for prevention programs, for realignment programs for kids and the like, and BSCC has a hand in the administration of that. They're charged with data mandates, and I want to talk in a minute about data because we don't have any good data on juvenile justice in California. Well, that's a little strong, but we have a long way to go there. And they're charged with policy development in the criminal justice area, and this is a kind of question mark with the Board of State and Community Corrections. The board is made up of sheriffs, probation, the head of corrections in California. Community-based agency representation is smaller, so there's a lot of sort of system function built into BSCC. And its role as a policy and system change agency is still being figured out. I've pushed at the board to augment the juvenile justice side. So we created a Juvenile Justice Standing Committee, which I chair, which is a great committee of experts, community-based people, education people in the field. And we're, again, pushing the envelope on policy change. We have also now, as a result of legislation last year, a juvenile justice data working group. That sounds kind of boring. It is to some. But we are in a backwater in California when it comes to performance outcomes for juvenile justice. We have no way of measuring recidivism rates for kids in California in a comprehensive manner. And in this way, we're unlike almost any other state. Other states have done a much better job. So we throw money at programs, but we can't tell you whether the kids are recidivating or not. More than that, we have a responsibility, I believe, to adopt wellness measures of how kids who are justice involved do when they come out. Is the justice system helping them with education, with getting jobs, with finding a place to live? Is it dropping them off on a street corner after they've been locked up and forgetting about them? We don't have wellness measures, and our Juvenile Justice Data Working Group is looking at how to move forward in that direction, which is, by the way, consistent with this whole notion that the system ought to be developmentally based. So we're working on that, and we have a report due to the legislature in the beginning of 2016. BSCC, as I mentioned, has expanded mightily in the area of funding, millions and hundreds of millions of dollars on the adult jail side, but it also administers the Burn JAG grant program, which we completely converted this year. All of that $20 million a year was going to drug enforcement task forces, and we were able to open that funding up for prevention, education, and other programs, and most of the programs funded in this year's round had a strong juvenile justice component. Proposition 47, that's at BSCC as well. That's the initiative that just passed that redefines felonies as misdemeanors and shortens prison terms takes those people out of prison and supposedly saves the state money. BSCC will spend 65% of the savings starting in 2017. And so we have a lot of discussion and meetings now in the agency about what BSCC's spending plans and priorities will be. And then we have legislators also who are looking at that pot of money and trying to focus it in one place or another. So those are some of the outlines of what the Board of State and Community Corrections does in the juvenile justice area. Stakeholder input is important. The meetings are lively. There's a lot of public comment. The foundations have, including endowment here, have supported a kind of advocacy watchdog presence at BSCC, and something for you to look at where what BSCC is doing and funding intersects with your interests. So I'm about through here. I will say this. The idea of BSCC as a juvenile justice agency is a little strange to me. California, unlike other states, does not have a Department of Juvenile Justice. Florida does, Virginia does, Nevada does. Other states have a house for juvenile justice in their Child, Youth, and Family or Health and Human Services division, but we don't. We have a division of juvenile justice, but it's the state prison system for kids. And its old role as a policy cauldron and developer, they let go of that really a long time ago. I was on a state juvenile justice commission that sunsetted in 2009. So no hub or central command post there for juvenile justice. And so we don't have a kind of guiding light for juvenile justice policy and program development in California. We have this default setup where the grants go into BSCC, where Department of Justice has some data functions and the like. And so I put this out there as a kind of challenge for the future. Is this how we should maintain ourselves? You know, we have a governor and a state that's not going to spend money on starting a new agency anytime soon. But the question is, who's responsible for the future of state policy? Right now, it's a bit helter-skelter, and policy is fashioned in the legislature, a bit pell-mell and ad hoc. And like I said, I think we're doing pretty well, but we're doing it without the command posts that other states have. So I'm going to finish up by just suggesting about 4 or 5 areas that represent what I think are the reform challenges that lie ahead for California. What are the key things that we ought to be doing over the next 5 or 10 years to make this system work and to improve kids' outcomes? That's really what we want to do. We want kids to do well after they do badly. So the first thing in my mind is kind of a global statement that we need to implement developmentally appropriate intervention and system responses at all practice levels and all stages of processing. This is about integrating that adolescent research into the system at all stages. This means in part identifying appropriate diversion options to keep kids out of formal processing when formal processing doesn't work or doesn't work as well as non-intervention. So we need to define that balance between processing and diversion. Re-entry. We have never done enough for kids coming out of incarceration and going back into a community. This has implications in all areas: racial and ethnic disparity, jobs, a feeder for the adult prison system. So this is a place where we need to do much more. On the mental health side, again, I mentioned earlier, we're not doing enough. We need more money in the system. We need better diagnostic tools. We need coordinated models like the Healthy Returns Initiative that was funded by the California Endowment but terminated in 2010, and there's much more we need to do there. Data. We don't have adequate data. We don't have adequate performance measures for the system. We're working on that. But ultimately, anything we recommend to replace our dinosaur of technology on the juvenile justice data side is going to cost money. And that's going to be a mountain to climb. So there's work to be done there too. And so finally, for all of these challenges, policymakers need to be informed and aware of what those challenges are, what the needs are, and that's a job for all of us when we talk to our lawmakers, to the governor, to department administrators and the like. We need to do work there as well. So I'm going to stop there. I think that's about 30 minutes. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yeah, you better take the microphone.
I don't think I need a microphone. I have a question on the performance measures that you're talking about for the state that need to be changed.
Thank you.
I want to ask about the performance measures that you're stating that need to be changed. Do you have states examples that could be provided to CPOC, Chief Probation Officers of California, to where they can look at that and see if that's something manageable that we could do at our levels? I mean, I know that DSCC had a work group with different parties that looked at data, and it was supposed to be already changed, but I know that it costs money for what the juvenile hall managers were going to report monthly and quarterly. But I think it would work best if the chiefs had a part in it, because I think that it would move. Because I know that there's a lot of stagnant when it comes to monies. But if it's a performance measure that we see could benefit the community, we'll work on it.
Fairly stated. The CPOC is very much involved in the work we're doing on trying to develop new performance measures. The Juvenile Justice Data Working Group, which is the statutory body working on this, has 3 probation chiefs, Jim Salio, Jill Silva, and Mike Artola, And so nothing is happening there without probation chief input. The chiefs have worked on their own to try to come up with a definition of recidivism, for example, on the juvenile justice side. And so this is not going forward without probation input or probation compatibility, I guess you could say. We all see the obstacles, though, which is money, the idea that the state will tell counties what they have to report that's different. That's a little hard to swallow. Standardizing the reports. There's just so many challenges in this. But if we don't do it, we just sail on willy-nilly, and we don't know the outcomes. Other questions? Yes.
In regards to, has there been any reform or policy changes regarding juveniles and the gang enhancement laws?
In there what?
The gang enhancement laws.
That, again, the question, you want to just quickly repeat it so everybody can hear it, or did everybody hear it?
Has there been any policy changes regarding juvenile gang enhancement laws?
Yeah. Gang enhancement laws were kind of cemented into statute by Prop 21 back in the year 2000. And so there's been a lot of court activity over who can be prosecuted under the gang enhancement laws and what their prison sentences are. So I haven't seen a lot of pullback on that. What we do have is a state program on the prevention side, CalGRIP, which puts $9.2 million into city-based grants every year, and that runs through the Board of State and Community Corrections. So it's kind of a balancing act. The prosecutors want gang enhancements. It's controversial. You know, we have this decline in crime, but if you live in certain cities in California, Salinas or Richmond or Stockton or LA, you may not believe that there's a decline in crime because you see, you know, gang killings in the headlines every day. This is a problem area, but it's segmented, and many of it's not necessarily a juvenile justice problem either, because a lot of the gang defendants are 30 years old. So in terms of, I don't see a quick turnaround in the gang crime enhancement laws coming about in California. We will see activity to try to pull back on direct file laws that push kids into adult court. That's boiling up now. But I think the focus needs to be more on the funding and service side, gang outreach, supporting programs like Greg Boyle's program, Homeboy down in LA, and other community-based programs that are doing good work in the streets. That's where we'll make progress.
Yeah, I was just wondering, do you foresee any policy then happening related to the direct file and prosecuting juveniles in adult court? Because I mean, we're seeing that. I mean, there's no diversion programs, you know, in our community, and so that they're recognizing as that. And so, just wondering about that.
Yeah, you know, a big problem here is the young adult prison population in California. And so while we realign kids out of the Youth Authority, DJJ, we also realigned a bunch of more serious juvenile offenders into the adult prison system. Direct file, prosecutors filing directly in adult court after Proposition 21, is the main pathway that as to how they get there. So I mentioned that many states, not many, a handful to be honest, have pulled back on direct file laws. Part of this new sea change in juvenile justice that seeks to put more kids into a service-based system, and that's less fear-based and incarceration-based. In California, we're kind of on the cusp of change. We have legislation by Senator Lara to try to improve reverse remand laws, but a direct frontal attack on direct file is still in the works, I would say. I'd say it's 2 or 3 years away, and I think that's when the advocates will probably clash with the prosecutors on this. And by the way, we don't have to clash with prosecutors on direct file. If prosecutors have a juvenile justice option, they'll go for juvenile justice processing in lieu of direct file in many cases, but they feel that they don't have a good serious offender program in the juvenile justice system, then they're going to direct file. But politically, it's down the pike.
All right. Any one last question before we turn it over to Mr. Redmond?
Okay, thanks guys.
Thank you. Oh,
Wasn't sure if you're going to do an additional.
intro. I'm just gonna change the slide.
Thank you. I got my time right here.
Can I say, just plug, I wanted to, this is just, I wanted to, I can't do it.
Oh.
I had my last slide. We have the Commonwealth Juvenile Justice Program publishes a lot of information on law and policy change. And this is our website, comjj.org, legislative updates and the like, and we'd be happy to help you out if you want more information. That's it. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Let me get the, thanks a lot. Good morning, everyone. Still morning. I see some familiar faces out there. Why don't I do a little more, tell you a little bit about myself while we're waiting for this. Again, my name is Castle Redmond. I'm a program officer at the California Endowment. And I'll give you a little background about me. First of all, are there any, with the question that David asked you all, are there any educators in the room? Great, great. I'm a former educator. I worked for the Oakland Unified School District for about 9 years, in East Palo Alto for a couple of years, and in Washington, D.C. for a year before that while I was in law school. And I did a number of things working in Oakland Unified School District, and before the last job that I had before I came to the California Endowment, I ran the Juvenile Reentry Program for the City of Oakland and the Oakland Unified School District. So I saw kids, and that's a segue to what David was talking about with regard to where there's a need. And that need was filled, began to be filled because of a lawsuit, right? The district got sued. It wasn't because the district had noticed that we're losing half the kids coming out of juvenile hall, we have no idea where they are. It was the lawyers who came in and said, this is unacceptable. So some pushing is really important, even for those of us who are insiders. But I also saw that the same kids with low-level behavior problems when I was working with them in middle school, the exact same kids I saw in juvenile hall later. I worked in group homes as well during some of that time that I was working in the school district. I saw some of those kids with really, really just really challenging, difficult, traumatic backgrounds without the school system being able, where the kids spend most of their time, without the school system being able to do anything with them, end up in juvenile hall, end up adult remands, even for non-capital offenses. And I really understood then that the schools have to be able to do more than what we're doing, right? Have to. And I saw firsthand that the what we now call the school to prison pipeline. The thing about it in schools, we didn't know what to do. So part of the deal is helping schools understand what you can do. This is the California Endowment. This is what we do. We have 14 sites throughout the state. There are program officers, program managers in those sites, really trying to make change in those sites, mostly through funding, but also through partnership with community-based organizations and government agencies, and pushing policy change. I am a program officer. I lead the school to prison pipeline work for the endowment. I don't oversee all of that $1 billion that we've been spending over the last 10 years, but I oversee a part of it that is focused on what we're talking about today. So some facts about suspensions. So last year we issued more than 500,000 suspensions. That's more than diplomas we handed out. But the good thing is that's actually down. Since all this work advocates have been doing over the last few years, suspensions have come down from over 700,000 to now over 500,000. And most of them are for the stuff that upsets adults. Someone used to say that most probation violations happen because of pissed off probation officers. It's the same thing with suspensions. And I've been guilty of it myself. It's normally not big, heavy, and some of you in the juvenile justice sector might think that, it's the kids carrying weapons, big gang fights, all that. it's normally just an interaction between a student and a teacher. A lack of respect. And that lack of respect, and just kind of give an overview, that lack of respect comes from something that some of that mind science that David was talking about. Students on campuses oftentimes, and especially kids of color, especially kids from impoverished backgrounds, especially kids with other stuff going on that makes them feel less worthy in a lot of ways. When they walk onto a campus, they don't feel welcome, they don't feel they belong there, and they lash out in a lot of different ways. Or they act out in a lot of different ways, and sometimes they withdraw. It's fight, flight, or freeze. It's trauma, it's implicit bias, but ultimately it's about whether or not kids feel like they belong there, right? And sometimes they withdraw, they don't go to school. And with the suspension part of it, that often lands kids in juvenile hall later, it is the acting out part of it. African American students are 3 times more likely to be suspended than other students. Latino students are disproportionately highly suspended. And the majority of suspensions are Latino students. Students in poverty are twice. Native Americans have a very high suspension rate as well. Small population, often invisible to us, but really, really critical. Again, disproportionate suspension rates, especially disabilities in special education. Overdiagnosis of special education, however, that's often just a way that schools are dealing with kids that they feel like they don't know how to deal with. So those kids, a third of African American kids, over a third of African American kids in special education are suspended at least once in middle school or high school. So I'll try to run through quickly. The willful defiance suspensions, the most subjective, much bigger gap between white students and students of color, black students, when willful defiance is the factor, or a suspension like that. It's recently, it's more of a recent phenomenon as well, right? So 40 years ago, suspension rates were pretty low, even for African American students, but it's shot up over the years, along with some other things. It also mirrors the rise in mass incarceration, right? National risk of suspension, especially for African American students, there's the rise in mass incarceration over the same period. And suspensions make matters worse. 6 times more likely to repeat a grade if you're suspended, 5 times more likely to drop out, and 3 times more likely to have contact with the juvenile justice system within the same year after one suspension. It's not just identifying those kids. Suspensions don't just happen to certain kids. It actually pushes them in a certain direction. Suspensions are a cry for help. A new study is a survey by the National Council on Crime and Delinquency showed that almost 90%, like 89% of kids in juvenile hall across the country have been suspended from school at least once. And what does that mean? Why is that a cry for help? Schools are the system we want kids in. We don't want kids in the justice system, right? We don't even want kids in the child welfare system. But we do want kids in the education system. We want them in school. So if a student is suspended, oftentimes, almost all the time, it is treated as you go home, you get corrected, you come back, everything's fine. 90% of the kids in juvenile hall have been suspended. Okay, that's not how it works. When you get suspended, that is a cry for help by the student, the family, but also the school. It's the school saying, okay, we don't know what to do with you here. Whatever we have, that's not working for us. And now with 6 standards a week, even the switch to Common Core, it is more and more critical that a student stays in school every single day. Chronic absence is a huge issue that folks are trying. Chronic absence, miss 10% of school, you have no chance of passing. That's basically what they're saying. So if you're missing school from being suspended, that is a huge warning sign right here that something has to be done. And most of the time, nothing is done. You come back, you go straight back to class. Bigger problems than you had before. It affects academic achievement. Really, that means schools ultimately are affected, right? High suspension rates. Schools with the highest graduation rates have the lowest suspension rates. This is all over the country. schools with the highest suspension rates have the lowest graduation rates, right? It's not brain surgery. If you are suspending kids from your school at a high rate, your school academically is going to underperform. It's an indicator, and it doesn't work. In other words, we need to do something different when we see that. So the status quo is not really an acceptable place to be for schools. It's hard, it's not easy to do something about it necessarily. It's always hard to see something different than the status quo. A study by WestEd on school climate showed that they have this thing called beats the odds. It's the similarly situated schools of all these factors, demographics, region, the whole bit. A school that's similarly situated to another school, they find out, well, what school is beating the odds? What school is outperforming its peer schools? Well, guess what? They looked at it. The number one factor was school climate. Why a school beats the odds? School climate, that thing that impacts suspensions, that thing that really is school discipline, the other side of school discipline. It is school climate. This is also the way everything we want to do around reducing suspensions is also the thing we do for turnaround schools. It's all the same stuff. It's also the way we close the achievement gap, right? Majority of kids of color are going to certain schools in certain neighborhoods, right? Majority of African American students are going to majority of Latino schools, okay? Those schools that are chronically underperforming are schools filled with kids of color, okay? And those schools are also where the highest suspension rates are. The same strategy to fix those problems around academic achievement are the same ones that we have to implement to reduce suspensions. And they actually get there through raising this issue of suspensions and expulsions in school climate. Alternatives are a win-win. They keep kids in school, actually making them safer. I'll tell you about them: restorative justice, PBIS, social emotional learning. Some of these you may have heard of. You get greater funding from ADA. Teachers, actually, your job satisfaction is better, right? I worked at a school in West Oakland where we implemented the first restorative justice pilot in Oakland almost 10 years ago. We did that because we felt as folks on that campus, as the adults, that we needed some support in how we go about this. The school was chaotic, the classroom management was a challenge, and school climate was really a mess. So it wasn't even about suspensions. We weren't so worried about those kids getting suspended, we were worried about the climate. So it makes it better for teachers as well. So here's an example of what happens when you implement a restorative justice or a positive behavior supports or social emotional learning. Davidson Middle School in San Rafael implemented restorative justice. Went from 375 suspensions a year to 45. Academic performance index, there's no API now, just at this point, but their API went up 80 points. And the biggest increases were for Latino students, English language learners, free and reduced lunch, right? Closing that achievement gap. API is academic performance. That goes up without even looking at instruction. Garfield High School, East LA. Over 600 suspensions a year. After some work, real work, wasn't just in a couple of years, real work, they decided to take suspension off the table. And during that time, their academic performance index went up over 120 points, the most in the state, while they stopped suspending kids. PBIS was what they used, positive behavior interventions and supports. Jedediah Smith, the principal, walked onto that campus in elementary school. The highest free and reduced lunch rate, Title I rate in any elementary school in Sacramento. The principal, who was supposed to be an academic instruction guy, said, I can't do anything about academic instruction until I get the school climate under control. What he did is implemented PBIS. Suspensions went way down. Academic performance went way up without focusing on academic instruction. Oakland Unified School District just had a report that talked about on their restorative justice program. They have a big restorative justice policy that is board reviewed. I won't go through all the numbers here, but all the indicators improved at those schools implementing restorative justice with fidelity. Graduation rates went up 60% in RJ schools, restorative justice schools, 7% in non-restorative justice schools. All other indicators improved. This is the slide I put together on what I think goes into a healthy school. It seems like a lot. This stuff can all be done with very little money. The number one thing, though, I would point out down here, and really the first and only thing you actually need is 100% commitment and 100% belief from leadership that change is possible. That means the kids can change and you can make change. The adults on that campus, the leadership can actually make something different than the status quo that they see. School police is another one. I just kind of added this, right? And there's not any law enforcement in the room. You know, and it's unfortunate because law enforcement often is not in these same conversations, so we don't have a. It's not an attack on law enforcement. Police are trained to do a certain thing. They have certain tools. They have a gun. They have a billy club, and they have handcuffs. And when you go on a school campus, you say, well, don't use any of those. And, you know, don't use all your training that you learned. In fact, try not to deal too much with students, but if you do, pretend you're a social worker, right? So it's a challenge. It's a really, really challenging environment for police officers. There was a small study that ACLU did that they found, and it wasn't really published because it was in a small number of districts, that the police officers on campuses that thought of themselves as wanting to do student engagement in a positive way actually arrested more kids than the ones who said, I don't really even want to be here. I was on one reason I decided to actually add this at the last minute is because I was on a school campus a couple weeks ago. And this school is doing great stuff. But they also have a school resource officer that is part of a police department for that district in the eastern part of LA County. And they're doing incredible stuff. Reducing suspensions, really, in a very short period of time, all kinds of stuff. Everything is improving. And we walked by a young lady, 90% Latino, this school, walked by a young lady, 15 years old, about 5'1", in foster care, being brought to the office. And he's like, man, principal saying, this is my toughest case right here. It's my toughest student. It's just hard. And she has a sour look on her face. They're actually having an assembly to honor all the kids who have had this great academic improvement, especially the kids who went from low to higher, all of that. They're honoring kids in the right way. This young lady is being brought to the office for something. Most of the administrators are going to deal with the assembly. We get a call. We walk over to the office after a while, half hour later. This little girl sitting in handcuffs, in a chair, with about 10 adults standing around her. She's shaking. I mean, I had never seen that before because I had never worked on a school campus with a school resource officer. She had allegedly stolen a cell phone from another student. And then the officer said, who's as big as I am, stronger than I am, said that she took a swing at him. So now she's in handcuffs. And I'm in shock. I've never seen this. I couldn't imagine that actually happening. A girl taking a swing at you, and now this is where it's going to go. And it's Friday, so she goes to juvenile hall. She gets out on Monday. If she gets out, depending on foster care, I worked in a group home raising a kid on an 8-hour shift, right? So I understand. And the reality is the principal had no power at that point. He couldn't even tell him to take the handcuffs off. He later pleaded with him. He later talked with him afterwards, after everyone calmed down, and the officer didn't take her to juvenile hall, didn't press charges on her, and took the handcuffs off. But the principal saying, if I was just there, none of this would have happened, right? I mean, the whole way he would have dealt with it would have been totally different. The cell phone was returned. I mean, we know what happened. The girl saying this assembly is for everything that I'm not. I'm worthless. I'm not someone who's going to be an academic achiever. Okay, that's not me. I'm raised by somebody who's there for 8 hours when I get there. I don't have parents, or my parents aren't functioning well. I'm going to do something. I'm going to get kicked out of here. I can't go to that assembly. I can't watch that. So she does a little something. And my thought was, well, would this officer, if that was his daughter who stole from her big sister or little sister, would he have called another officer in to handcuff her? No, but this is what we do. And even in that moment, when I was walking back to the assembly, there were folks saying, well, you know, this is the same teachers who are touting how great things have changed, how good things are at this campus, how the climate and the relationships are so much better, saying, well, you know, it's a gang culture here, and it's putting the blame right on that girl again, right? When we really could do a lot better by her. And so I think it's a danger to have. I personally am uncomfortable with police on campuses. I personally don't believe they are necessary at all on a school campus. That's my personal belief. The endowment hasn't taken a stand on school police. I don't believe you belong on campuses if you're a cop. I don't. And if you are, what we need, or at least this, right? We need protocols around police and school interactions, like principals. I hear this all the time. I know when I was a counselor, a case manager, you get brought in to do discipline. You're the guy with a hammer. This little kid is not going to listen to me. Well, you're going to listen to the guy in the uniform with a gun. Okay, that's for certain. And you get brought in like that. But there are rarely protocols around how principals, administrators should be dealing with police officers. When an officer should say, no, that's not my job. Okay, that's your job, which is what most police officers want to say. But no, but you don't say no when someone is asking you for help. Protect and serve, and that's what police do. And so they get brought in. And then, if that young person disrespects you, there's a limit to how much of that you can take. You're a cop. You feel like that fundamentally will interfere with your ability to protect the community if you don't command and demand respect from those folks you interact with. Memorandums of understanding are critical. There's one now in Oakland, there's one in LA, San Francisco. You have to have that if you're going to have police at all involved in your schools. But there's good stuff happening. Like I said, 25% reduction in suspensions over the last couple of years, down 15% last year, expulsions down 25%. The other thing is there's a lot of policy change. There have been 9 bills that have passed on this issue, one around willful defiance. Oakland Unified just yesterday passed a policy saying that they will no longer suspend kids out of school for willful defiance. You can do in-school suspension. There are a lot of things you can do, but they have restorative justice working all over the place. The only place it's not working is where there's not commitment. So they're not going to be able to suspend for that anymore after this year of implementation. By a year from now, they will not be able to do that anymore. It's already happened in San Francisco. Policy's already passed in LA. LA Unified is big. It doesn't get implemented all at once like it can in most districts. And also, I'm working very hard on teacher credentialing reform. Every 10 years, teacher credentialing is the standards are changed. So what you learn when you're learning what it is to become a teacher, how to become a teacher, that changes. There hasn't been school climate or school discipline or even classroom management in teacher credentialing as a standard, at least since the 70s, and it's debatable whether it was actually there then. So teachers get thrown in, new teachers in the roughest schools, right? Because that's where no one wants to go. They have no idea what to do when they walk into this classroom full of these kids who don't trust them. Usually you expect to say, hey, I'm a teacher, I'm here for you. Don't you trust me? Don't you believe that? Kids say, no, prove it. You don't know how, right? And then you get caught off guard by everything that happens in that moment. If you're not already caught off guard by the fact that those kids may be from a completely different neighborhood you come from, completely different color, ethnicity, language than you speak. So that, I think, is really a critical under the radar policy change that needs to happen. Most of it, though, is going to be around implementation. I will say one other thing around this, is that a lot of the best work in the country that has gone on in school discipline reform has been pushed by judges, juvenile court judges, saying we don't want to see these kids here. Okay, we want you to deal with them there. We believe you can if you do what is necessary and implement best practices. So probation, juvenile justice, all the CBOs, and the juvenile court judges, anyone who cares about incarceration, mass incarceration, juvenile justice, should also be very highly focused on school discipline reform. And that's really my pitch. I think that's the last slide. And thank you all. I'd love to hear any questions that you have.
Hi. I'm not a fan of alternative school, and we do know that providing extracurricular activities, be it sports or any kind of other hobbies for students, is very critical in kind of building their self-esteem, making them feel better about themselves. Can you maybe talk about why in all the alternative schools we have, no adult or policymakers ever thought about instituting this into the schools? Because we know that they send the quote-unquote the worst kids to the alternative schools, but they forget that there are other kids, maybe due to other life situations, have been behind in credit and as well sent over to those schools, not because of behavioral issues, but because they are behind in credit. On getting there becomes a big nightmare for these kids as well. So can you address that if anybody was ever looking at it?
Yeah, so I'll address it. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. My mother said I had a face for radio when I was a kid, so yeah. So I think that's actually a really important issue. And I worked in the toughest school I ever worked in anywhere was Rudsdale High School in East Oakland, which is an alternative ed school. That had a mix of kids behind in credits and discipline issues, kind of multiple ways of getting there. The alternative ed schools in Oakland are much better now than they were then. But I was always an athlete: football, basketball, baseball. Played football in college, so I believed in that. And so I did my own, as a teacher, did my own sports. Right? We would go figure it out. Kids wanted to play. It's really critical. The reason, we can go back to Prop 13 to determine why we don't have that, right, in all schools. It's a tremendous challenge doing juvenile reentry. I try to get kids who want to play football, who are going to one of the alt ed schools, and even for good reason, even if they wanted to, because they wanted to make up credits in the right way and they want to do this, for them to be able to play ball, any sport, it becomes this challenge that no one's really looking out for. You got to navigate that yourself. It's a big issue in juvenile reentry, by the way, is that kids have to have a calendar. They have to have their own organizer, planner, to be able to navigate all the things thrown at them. And then the things that they actually want, right? They've got a case manager, a probation officer, a therapist, their school stuff, social worker, and they got to make all those appointments, right? And they have the least resources at home to help them. And then when they miss, we want to threaten to bring them back to juvenile hall, right? To violate them. So what I would say on that finally is that if you're committed, if that on that one slide, that commitment and belief, if you're committed to that, then you will do whatever is necessary. And you will, if you're running an alt ed school, right? If you're committed to changing that culture there, you will have sports if they need sports. You will find that out, and you will have that. On a policy level, I don't know who's looking at that, if anyone, probably district by district, but it's about leadership and commitment by the school principal and folks there. Yes.
I understand the May Revise comes out this afternoon, and the news coverage is already talking about how the economy is doing so much better, but fortunately or unfortunately, most of this new income is going to go to schools. So I wonder, I don't know enough about how Prop 98 works to know the answer to this, but from either of your perspectives, do you think there's any opportunity this year to help promote that schools use some of the influx of resources for things that we know work for the population that we're talking about, or do individual schools pretty much get to do this or other things with that money? Yeah,
that's a really good question, and we'll go bigger than the May Revise or Prop 98, Prop 30, whatever local control funding formula, where these funds are coming from. It's in certain instances, local control funding formula, for instance, there are 8 priority areas. One of them is school climate that has suspensions and expulsions as the major indicators, right? So you have to focus dollars on that. I have a coalition of advocate partners that are working on this. So the Prop 47 funding, there's a bill out there by Senator Liu to make sure that Prop 47 funding, the savings that go to the California Department of Education are used for school climate, right? To actually keep kids out of the system. There normally is not a lot, and that's because our governor, as you know, probably really believes in local control. So it's really going to take district by district, county by county, community by community. I'm a big believer in supporting and funding grassroots organizing to make sure that exactly that happens, and to be able to do it at the Capitol. We need more of that. We need to make sure that school climate, school discipline are elevated. If the schools are going to use those dollars, that no matter what, keeping kids out of that system, whatever the best practices, that you should spend it on that.
I want to jump in on this because there is a very interesting bill in the legislature now, and I can't remember. I think it's AB 710 by Brown, and it would add probation kids to the list of kids that get expanded funding under the local control formula. In the past, it's been limited to foster care and other defined kids. I mean, this is another sort of instance of integrating the needs of this population, as you refer to it, into the sort of mainstream school resources that are lacking for them. Total uphill battle. I don't know how this is going to come out. I think it's a test of whether we can take the next step with education improvement for probation kids. And it's about money. And it's about local control. And about a governor who will come out of it. We don't know how. But, you know, stuff's happening.
Other questions? Well, thank you very much. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you.